My name is Samantha Reynolds. I'm 32 years old. I'm successful, but my family still thinks I'm a failure. For 15 years, they called my career in hospitality a glorified maid job. This year, the family reunion is at Mountain Lake Resort, a five-star destination I secretly own. When my cousin Julia assigned the rooms, guess who got the storage closet with a leaking ceiling? Me. But I had the presidential suite keycard in my pocket all along. If your family has ever underestimated you, stay tuned. And if you're watching from somewhere beautiful, comment where you're watching from. Do you have relatives who think too little of you? Hit subscribe for more stories about sweet, sweet karma. Growing up in the Reynolds family meant one thing: knowing your place. And our place, right at the bottom. My parents, Robert and Diane, were what the family politely called the sensible ones. That was code for the poor ones. Dad worked as a high school teacher. Mom was a nurse at the local hospital. They worked hard. They gave me and my brother a loving home. But love wasn't enough for Aunt Margaret and Uncle Harold. They were the wealthy ones. Aunt Margaret married into money, and Uncle Harold owned a chain of car dealerships. Every family reunion at their mansion felt like a competition. We'd arrive in our old sedan, carrying homemade food. Meanwhile, the others pulled up in luxury SUVs with catered meals from fancy restaurants. Their children, Julia and Thomas, kept the tradition alive. Julia, 3 years older than me, once handed me a bag of her designer hand-me-downs. I thought you could use these, Sam, she said with a sweet smile, making sure everyone heard. Thomas was quieter, but just as condescending. He'd say things like, Samantha will be fine at the kids' table. I heard that well into my 20s. When I went to college, I worked 3 jobs to pay my way. I studied business. Business is so general, Aunt Margaret said at Christmas. What are you going to do with that? At least get an accounting certificate so you can do taxes. They expected me to follow my parents' path, modest, invisible. But I had bigger dreams. After graduation, I started at the very bottom, front desk clerk at a budget hotel chain. The hours were long, the pay was low, but I watched. I learned. I absorbed every detail of how a hotel worked. That's when I met Eleanor Wright, a veteran in the hospitality industry. One day, I helped solve a booking problem for one of her clients. She was impressed. You have a natural talent for this, she told me. It's not just about rooms, it's about making people feel valued. With Eleanor as my mentor, I moved up fast, from front desk to assistant manager, from budget hotels to luxury properties. Eventually, Eleanor invited me to join her boutique hotel company. That's where I got my first big chance. A small historic hotel went up for sale. It was run down, a risky investment. It's a gamble, Eleanor warned me, but sometimes you have to bet on yourself. I emptied my savings, took out a loan, poured my heart into renovations. 18 months later, the Harrington House opened. It was a hit, rave reviews, fully booked weekends, a waiting list for weddings. That success led to others. I became known for spotting hidden gems and turning them into high-end destinations. I created Reynolds Hospitality Group. Last year, I bought Mountain Lake Resort, a five-star jewel in the mountains, my proudest achievement. No one in my family knew. So when Aunt Margaret announced in the family group chat, this year's reunion will be at Mountain Lake Resort, Julia will assign rooms as usual. Julia sent me a private message. Sam, just checking if you can afford to come. I know hospitality's been tough lately. We can help with your share. The fake concern stung. Thanks, Julia. I'm fine. I'll be there. 2 weeks later, she texted again. We're trying to honor everyone's preferences for rooms. I almost laughed. In 15 years, no one had ever asked my preferences. I was always stuck with whatever room was left after the important family members were placed. As the reunion drew closer, I got more messages. Rebecca Thomas's wife wrote, I'm packing 3 cocktail dresses. Sam, let me know if you need to borrow something. I thanked her but smiled. Little did she know, I owned the place. This year, things would be very different. The day of the reunion finally arrived. I drove up the long mountain road with my parents. They were excited as always. Dad talked about how beautiful the resort looked in the pictures. Mom chatted about seeing all the cousins again. They had no idea I owned the place. I never told them, not because I didn't trust them, but because I wanted this weekend to play out naturally. As we rounded the final corner, the resort came into view. Mountain Lake Resort stood tall and proud, with its stone walls, large windows, and flower-filled balconies. A valet opened our car doors as soon as we pulled up. Welcome to Mountain Lake Resort, he said with a professional smile. My mom whispered, Samantha, isn't this place stunning? I smiled. It really is. At the entrance, Julia waved us over. She was dressed in a designer sundress and oversized sunglasses, like she was already starring in a vacation magazine spread. Sam, over here. I rolled my suitcase toward her. We're so glad you could make it, Julia said. I was worried with your career situation. You might not afford the trip. My parents stiffened. I forced a polite smile. Thanks for your concern, Julia. I'm fine. Of course, she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Anyway, I've arranged everyone's rooms. Just check in with me first. We followed her to the reception area. The marble floors gleamed. A huge chandelier sparkled above us. My staff moved around quietly, helping guests. Julia handed me a key card. You're in the Lakeside Annex. It's a cozy little room off the main building. There's a small maintenance issue with the ceiling, but it should be fine. My parents exchanged a worried glance. Julia, maybe we should switch with Samantha. She can take our room, Mom offered. Julia laughed lightly. Oh no, Aunt Diane, you deserve your space. Sam's room is fine for her. It's fine, I said firmly. Thanks, Julia. I didn't want to make a scene. But inside, I was smiling. Julia had no idea I could walk straight to the top floor and claim the presidential suite. As we made our way to the annex, I passed Thomas and his wife Rebecca, lounging by the lobby fireplace. Rebecca waved. Sam, you made it. We were just saying how lucky we are to get the Lakeview suite. You'll love this place. Though she paused, lowering her voice. We heard your room is a bit rustic. I nodded. It's perfect for me. She tilted her head like she didn't believe me. The Lakeside Annex was a converted storage area. My room was small, with one tiny window and a faint smell of mildew. A drip of water fell from the ceiling into a bucket in the corner. This is where Julia thought I belonged. But I wasn't staying there. As soon as I unpacked enough clothes to make it look real, I slipped out the back door and made my way to a staff-only entrance. I used a private elevator key, straight to the top floor. The doors opened into the presidential suite. My suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a stunning view of the lake and mountains. A marble fireplace stood in the center. There were fresh flowers on the table and a welcome basket with my favorite wine. A handwritten note read, Welcome home, Miss Reynolds. The team is honored to host your family, Gregory. I smiled. My staff had prepared everything perfectly. This weekend would be fun. That evening, we gathered for a welcome dinner in the grand dining room. The tables were set with fine china and crystal glasses. Soft music played as staff moved gracefully between tables. Aunt Margaret was in her element, holding court at the head of the table. She raised a glass. I can see why it's so exclusive. The owner is quite young, Julia added. I read she's self-made. Probably married well, though. I sipped my wine silently. What about you, Sam? Rebecca asked. Still working at that hotel? Yes, I said calmly. Hospitality keeps me busy. Aunt Margaret waved her hand dismissively. Not everyone needs to be a big success. Some people are happy with small lives. My parents shifted uncomfortably. I stayed quiet. Let them think what they want for now. After dinner, Julia and Thomas started showing off their rooms on social media. Thomas posted a photo of his Lakeview suite with the caption, Now this is luxury, worth every penny. Rebecca posted a video twirling in her walk-in closet. When your resort suite is bigger than your apartment. Meanwhile, my parents looked guilty about their comfortable suite. Mom whispered, Sweetheart, are you sure you're okay in that little room? Mom, I'm fine, I said with a reassuring smile. I didn't tell them about the massive bedroom waiting for me upstairs. Back in my presidential suite, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The night air was cool. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. Below, I could see my family laughing around the fire pit. They still didn't know whose resort they were sitting in. Soon they would. The second day of the reunion began with breakfast in the resort's main dining room. My parents and I arrived a little late, and most of the family was already there. Julia waved me over. Sam, you're at table 4 with the kids. Hope that's okay. It's a little crowded this morning. I glanced at table 4. 3 teenagers were already there, glued to their phones. I smiled politely and sat down. Perfect, I said, though my stomach tightened. Even now, at 34 years old, Julia still thought I belonged at the kids' table. As I ate quietly, I watched Aunt Margaret holding court at the center table. She was describing the resort to Thomas and Rebecca, as if she owned it. This place really understands luxury. I mean, even the bathrooms feel like spas, Aunt Margaret said. Thomas nodded. They've done a great job. You can tell the owner has money and taste. Probably not someone from humble beginnings. I sipped my coffee and said nothing. Later that morning, I went for a walk around the resort. The gardens were in full bloom. I saw Gregory, my general manager, giving instructions to staff near the outdoor pool. How are they treating everyone? I asked when no one else could hear. Gregory gave me a tight smile. Most of your family has been polite, but Julia complained about slow service yesterday. And Aunt Margaret sent back 2 bottles of wine at dinner, said they weren't premium enough. I nodded. Not surprising. The staff handled it professionally, Gregory added, but they know who's watching. Good, I said. They deserve my family's respect too. By lunchtime, the family had gathered for a picnic near the lake. The resort staff had prepared everything. Gourmet sandwiches, fresh salads, lemonade in crystal pitchers. I sat on a blanket near my parents while the others talked loudly about their lives. Thomas got another promotion, Aunt Margaret said proudly. Senior partner at the firm. And Julia's Daniel just bought a new Mercedes SUV.
Rebecca turned to me. What about you, Sam? Any big news? I shook my head. Nothing worth mentioning. Still single? She asked with a fake sympathetic smile. Yes, I replied. Thomas laughed. You should try online dating. Might find someone who doesn't mind a tight budget. Thanks for the advice, I said calmly, hiding my irritation. They didn't know my net worth could buy every car they owned, and still leave me comfortable. That evening was the big formal dinner. Everyone dressed up for the occasion. My parents looked elegant in their simple outfits. I wore a long emerald green gown that fit perfectly. As we entered the grand dining room, I saw Julia's eyes widen slightly. But she recovered quickly. Sam, you look nice. Did you borrow that from Rebecca? No, I said with a smile. It's mine. Dinner was a multi-course affair. The staff brought out dishes one by one, each beautifully presented. Aunt Margaret raised her glass. Let's toast to family, and to this amazing resort. I hope next year's location is just as nice. Julia nodded. I wonder who owns this place. Probably some foreign investor. These properties don't just fall into the hands of ordinary people, Rebecca added. Or someone married rich. That's the only way to get into this business. Not always, I said softly. They all looked at me. Some people work hard and build things themselves, I added. Julia gave me a little smirk. Sure, Sam, but in this economy, it's almost impossible without help. I let it go. For now. After dessert, Aunt Margaret began discussing next year's reunion plans. We might return to Harold's beach house, unless someone else wants to host. My parents exchanged a nervous glance. They never offered because they knew their small house wasn't acceptable. Sam, maybe you could host someday, Rebecca said with a laugh. That is if you ever get a place big enough. The table chuckled. I smiled politely, but inside my patience was thinning. They had no idea the entire resort around them belonged to me. That night, back in the presidential suite, I stood by the window overlooking the lake. Below, my family gathered around a fire pit, laughing and sipping wine. They didn't know I could see everything. Tomorrow was the final day of the reunion, and tomorrow they would learn the truth. The final day of the reunion started with a group breakfast on the terrace. The view of the lake was breathtaking, with the sun reflecting off the calm water. I arrived a little later than the rest. As I stepped onto the terrace, I could hear Julia's laughter. She was sitting with Aunt Margaret and Rebecca, sipping mimosas. Oh, Sam, over here, Julia called. I joined them and sat down quietly. We were just talking about next year's reunion, Aunt Margaret said. Maybe we'll do a cruise. That way no one has to host. Rebecca nodded. Yes, and it keeps things consistent. Some places just aren't suitable for a Reynolds gathering, you know? True, Julia agreed. Then she looked at me. Unless you surprise us, Sam. Buy yourself a little vacation home. You could host then. The sarcasm was light, but it stung. I smiled. Maybe one day. After breakfast, my family scattered across the resort. Some went to the spa, others took a guided hike. Aunt Margaret and Uncle Harold spent hours at the golf course, loudly praising the staff. Meanwhile, I walked through the property with Gregory. Everything's running smoothly, he said. Good, I replied, but make sure the team gets a bonus for this weekend. They've dealt with my family perfectly. Already planned, Gregory said with a grin. Though, Julia tried to order a staff-only bottle of wine last night. She told the sommelier she knew the owner personally. I laughed softly. Oh, I'm sure she thinks she does. That afternoon, I passed Thomas at the poolside bar. He was bragging loudly to another guest about his law firm. The partners trust me completely, he said. It's all about knowing how to handle people. That's why I keep moving up. He noticed me walking by. Sam, want a drink? Or is that out of budget? I'm fine, thanks, I said calmly. Suit yourself, he replied with a smirk. The way they still saw me as the poor cousin made me want to laugh. If only they knew the bartender was one of my employees, and every bottle behind the counter was stocked under my approval. That evening was the farewell banquet, everyone dressed in their finest. The dining room sparkled with candlelight and fresh flowers. As I entered, Julia approached me. Sam, we've put you at table 6. Hope that's all right. It's near the back, but still has a view of the garden. Perfect, I said, smiling. Gregory came over quietly and asked, shall I prepare everything for your announcement? I nodded. Yes, let's do it after dessert. Dinner went as expected. Aunt Margaret gushed about the resort again. Truly first class. I must speak to the owner. They deserve our thanks. Julia sighed dramatically. If only we could meet her. I'd love to get tips for Daniel's next real estate venture, Rebecca added. Someone like her must have powerful connections. I took another sip of my wine. Or maybe just a lot of hard work, I said softly. Julia chuckled. Oh, Sam, don't be naive. In this world, no one built something like this alone. When dessert was served, Gregory stepped forward and addressed the family. Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Mountain Lake Resort, I hope you've enjoyed your stay. The family clapped politely. Before we finish tonight, there's one more thing. Our owner wanted to personally thank this special group for choosing our resort for their reunion. Aunt Margaret straightened in her chair. Oh, how lovely. I'd love to meet her. Gregory smiled. You already have. He turned slightly. May I present our owner, Miss Samantha Reynolds? The room fell silent. I stood up slowly and walked to the front. Every eye in the room was on me. Julia's mouth dropped open. Rebecca's fork clattered onto her plate. Aunt Margaret froze mid-sip of wine. Good evening, everyone, I said calmly. I'm so glad you enjoyed your stay at Mountain Lake Resort. Aunt Margaret blinked. Wait, you own this place? I nodded. Yes, I purchased the resort last year. It's part of Reynolds Hospitality Group. Reynolds Hospitality Group. Thomas repeated confused. That's my company, I explained. We own several boutique hotels and luxury resorts now. Julia flushed deep red. Boo, why didn't you say anything? I smiled slightly. I wanted to see how my family treated me, without knowing I owned the place they were staying in. The silence was thick. My parents looked shocked but proud. Honey, Mom whispered, you never told us. I wanted it to be a surprise, I said softly. Aunt Margaret's hand trembled as she set down her glass. Well, this is certainly unexpected. I turned to Julia. Thank you for assigning me the Lakeside Annex. It reminded me of where I started, and how far I've come. Julia's face burned red. Thomas muttered, guess we underestimated you. You're not the first, I replied calmly. As I looked around the room, I saw it, the shift in their eyes. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. The room stayed quiet for what felt like forever. My family stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time. Aunt Margaret's perfect smile wavered. Julia's cheeks burned as she fiddled nervously with her napkin. Finally, my dad broke the silence. Samantha, we're so proud of you. His voice cracked, and Mom reached for my hand, her eyes shining with tears. I smiled. Thanks, Dad. Thanks, Mom. But my eyes stayed on Aunt Margaret. You built all this? She asked, her voice tight. Yes, I said. I started small, worked my way up. Mountain Lake was my biggest project so far. Uncle Harold cleared his throat. Impressive. Very impressive. But his tone didn't sound sincere. More like someone trying to process being knocked off his pedestal. Julia finally spoke. Why didn't you tell us? We could have celebrated your success together. I tilted my head. Would you have? Her mouth opened, then closed. She had no answer. I continued. For years I heard the jokes, the little digs about my glorified maid service, the comments about my finances. You didn't think I belonged at the grown-up table, let alone owning a luxury resort. Rebecca squirmed in her chair. Thomas stared at his wine glass. Aunt Margaret tried to recover her composure. Well, family should support each other. We may have underestimated you, Samantha, but it wasn't just underestimating, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. It was disrespect. Every year I was put in the smallest room, treated as if my achievements didn't count. Even this weekend, Julia put me in a converted storage closet. Julia's face turned crimson. I didn't know. You didn't care to know, I said. But now you all do. The staff began clearing plates. The room remained uncomfortably silent, except for the soft clink of silverware. I took a deep breath. Don't worry, I'm not here to hold grudges. I'm here to remind you that everyone deserves respect, regardless of what you think they're worth. As the dinner ended, some relatives tried to make small talk. You must give us a tour sometime, Thomas said awkwardly. Or maybe some business advice, Uncle Harold added. I smiled politely, but didn't commit. The power dynamic had shifted, and they all knew it. Later in the presidential suite, I looked out over the lake one last time. My parents sat with me, still beaming with pride. You worked so hard for this, sweetheart, Mom said softly. Don't let anyone dim that light. We knew you'd do great things, Dad added. I hugged them both. Thanks for always believing in me, even when no one else did.
The next morning, as my family prepared to check out, Julia approached me in the lobby. Sam, I'm sorry for how I treated you all these years. I didn't realize. I know, I said gently, but now you do. If you ever need help, she began. I shook my head with a small smile. Thanks, Julia, but I think I'm doing okay. As the family loaded their luxury SUVs and said their goodbyes, Aunt Margaret gave me a stiff hug. This resort is very well run. Congratulations, Samantha. Thank you, I replied simply. When the last car disappeared down the mountain road, I exhaled deeply. For 15 years, they had dismissed me, mocked me, underestimated me. Now they'd been served a lesson in humility, in respect, in karma, and I hadn't needed to raise my voice or prove anything. My success spoke for itself. That night, I posted a photo on social media. It was of the resort's lake at sunset. My caption read, "Sometimes the best revenge is living well and owning the place where they doubted you." The likes and comments rolled in, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace.